All right, we're talking about polyatomic ions, or an ion made of many atoms. All right, and we have our list of, I believe there's 21 polyatomic ions. All right, and they have +1, -1, -2, and -3 charges. And we're responsible to know all these ions, which is quite the burden. All right, if you're going to use an old-fashioned memorization technique like flashcards, and I've set up a flashcard set called FJA Polys at Quizlet, it would be a little bit of a task in order to memorize all 21 of the charges, the name, and the formula. Okay, you need all three things: the formula with the charge and the name. Well, we talked about maybe there's a little bit of an easier way, and perhaps if we knew a little bit something of how these polyatomic ions are named, maybe life could get a little easier. And if you look here, you can see that there isn't a correlation between 8s and ites. All right, so we have these 4 8s and ites. Note that there's virtually nothing different from the 8 to the ite, okay, except for the name change, obviously, and the number of oxygens. You can see we go from 3 oxygens to 2 oxygens, 3 to 2, 4 to 3, and 4 to 3. We're a little backwards here. I should have flipped these on the table. Okay. Well, if you know the 8-ite rule, and you know these 4 polyatomic ions, well, if you know these 4, well, then you know an additional 4. Okay, so it makes memorization a little bit easier. Okay, we set ourselves up to actually be able to we set ourselves up in order to put ourselves in a position where we can memorize 4 and actually in the process memorize 8. All right, well, keeping these 4 in mind, I'm actually going to add another one, the carbonate. Okay, so now we have 5 altogether. We have chlorate, nitrate, carbonate, sulfate, and phosphate. Note that carbonate didn't have a carbonite to go along with it. But when you have these 5, we have the 8-ite rule, and then we also have the hydrogen rule when we add hydrogens. For example, carbonate is CO3 minus 2. Hydrogen carbonate is HCO3 minus 1. Okay, what's the difference between the two? Well, I just added an H in front, and instead of carbonate, I call it hydrogen carbonate. And because hydrogens are +1, I lowered my overall charge from -2 to -1. Okay, because I'm adding a positive hydrogen, my charge goes down. And you can see that in a couple other spots. Okay, we have the hydrogen carbonate. We have hydrogen sulfate, where we have our sulfate ion, and we add an H to it for hydrogen sulfate. Same thing, charge goes down, becomes a little bit more positive. We have hydrogen phosphate, where I have my phosphate ion and I add an H to it. Okay, so it's HPO4 instead of PO4, and it's now -2 instead of -3. And lastly, we have di, meaning to dihydrogen phosphate, where I have my phosphate ion, and now I add 2 H's, and because I'm adding 2 +1s, my charge actually goes from -3 to -1. All right, so knowing those 5 with the asterisk, okay, and again, just for clarity, knowing this one, the chlorate, the nitrate, the carbonate, the sulfate, and the phosphate, knowing these 5 will actually give you an additional 8. So that's actually 13 of our 21 ions. All right, leaving the rest of, I guess you could call them oddballs. We don't have really a shortcut for the rest of the other 8 down below. Okay, ammonium, acetate, hydroxide, cyanide, permanganate, peroxide, chromate, and dichromate. Well, what I did was I have my 8 below, and now I'm only going to be able to memorize these 8, or I'm only going to have to memorize these 8, okay, plus the additional 5 that I highlighted above. All right, so if I have my 8 that I need to memorize below, and then with that I have to memorize my chlorate, nitrate, sulfate, carbonate, phosphate. If I have these 8 and I have these 5, all right, that gives me 13 of the pairs of the polyatomic ions to memorize instead of the 21. Okay, so if I have all of these on the bottom and then the ones with the asterisk, and I know the 8-ite rule and the hydrogen rule, I'm cutting my list down, okay, from an overall 21 to a 13. Okay, and I made a new data set up at Quizlet. If you put in FJA Polys, you're going to get now 2 data sets. The first one is all 21 terms. Okay, you can see all 21 terms. This is all 21 of the polyatomic ions. And then it says only the essentials, FJA Polys, only the essentials. These are the 13, basically the ones that you absolutely need to know without the 8-ite rule or the hydrogen rule. For example, you have sulfate, and these are only the essentials, so you should know that there's also a sulfite, worst looking sulfite ever. Okay, there's a sulfite that's also -2, and there's an HSO4 -1, which is hydrogen sulfite. Okay, basically what I'm saying is you should be able to know that there's a sulfate, and know that there's also a sulfite and a hydrogen sulfite. To each his own. Okay, some of us will be able to study these essential 13 and be able to know the extra 8 you get from the hydrogen rule and the 8-ite rule. Some of us may be better off studying the entire 21. To each his own. I'm just letting you know that I made that extra data set, and perhaps that helps us out.